Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
Okay, so we're taking a deep dive this time into uh, dictators and police states. And wow, you really sent us down a rabbit hole with this one. Hitler and Castro, two totally different dudes, different places, different times, but both built these regimes on fear, total control, like every little whisper.
Yeah, it really is kind of terrifying when you think about it. I mean, these were really different ideologies, right? Nazism and communism, about as different as you can get.
Yeah.
But they both ended up using the same tools: fear, surveillance, coercion. It's almost like there's some kind of dictator playbook they both got a hold of.
Right. Like were they comparing notes or something? But okay, let's get into it. Let's start with Hitler's Germany. We've got the SS, the Gestapo, SD. Just saying those names out loud gives me the chills.
For the average person in Germany back then, fear wasn't just an idea, it was just it was their life. Just imagine, it's the 1930s, you're in Berlin, maybe you're a shopkeeper, a teacher, maybe you're just trying to live your life. But everything you say, every book you read, even just like saying hi to someone on the street, it was all being watched.
And that's where groups like the SS and the Gestapo come in, right?
Yeah.
They're the ones who actually made that fear real.
Absolutely. Think of the SS like this monster with all these different heads. I mean, they were Hitler's like inner circle, right? There was bodyguards, but then they ended up running the concentration camps too. And then there was this branch called the Death's Head units.
God, that name. Just awful.
Okay.
We all know about the camps and everything, but how did they actually keep control day to day?
That's where the Gestapo comes in. The secret police, they were actually pretty small, only about 20,000 officers for the whole country in 1939. But they were everywhere, and it's because they had this huge network of informants.
Wait, informants. So everyday Germans were ratting each other out.
It's a scary thought, but yeah. They would use, like, block wardens, people who lived in your building, to spy on their neighbors, and anything could be considered suspicious.
Well, you couldn't even trust the people you were living next to. God, that's just unsettling.
Yeah.
I mean, did people really buy into all this?
It's unbelievable, but yeah. Historians think there were hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of people who voluntarily turned other people in during that time. They turned on their neighbors, coworkers, even their own family, sometimes for really, really small things.
Oh, makes you think, would I have been brave enough to speak up,
Yeah.
to help my neighbors? Or would I have just stayed quiet, too afraid to do anything?
Yeah, that's something we all kind of wrestle with when we think about this period, That instinct to protect yourself, it's really strong. And the Nazis, they knew how to use that. They created this culture of suspicion where everyone was constantly looking over their shoulder.
And then on top of all that, you have the SD, the brains of the whole operation, always watching, always listening, even within the Nazi party. Talk about intense.
Exactly. They had to find and get rid of anyone who was even a possible threat to Hitler, whether it's someone handing out flyers or even some high-ranking official saying they had doubts. No one was safe.
Man, it's just, I can't even imagine living with that. Always looking over your shoulder, the SS, the Gestapo, the SD. You'd have to basically like become a different person, right? Just to survive.
It really makes you think, doesn't it, about how these regimes, they didn't just want to control what you did. They wanted to control how you thought, your whole self. But then what happens when you take that control and you mix it with, well, at least on the surface, this idea of like helping people? Like that's what makes Castro's Cuba so interesting, especially compared to Nazi Germany.
Yeah, that's what gets me, this whole control through community thing. It almost sounds nice, until you realize they had forced labor camps, like UMAP. How did they get away with that?
Dictatorships, they're really good at twisting words around. UMPP, it stood for Military Units to Aid Production. Sounds almost harmless, right? But it was really just a way to get rid of anyone they didn't like. They'd send them off to these camps to do forced labor.
We're talking political opponents, LGBTQ plus folks, religious groups, anyone who didn't fit in. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's something you see with both the Nazis and in Cuba. They might have different ideas, but they end up using the same tactics to silence people they see as a threat.
But with Castro, it wasn't really the camps. It was the CDRs, the neighborhood watch groups. That was his real tool.
Okay, so imagine this. Your neighbors, your friends, they're being called to tell on you. Like anything you say, anything you do.
Whoa. That's next level paranoia. How did they even get people to go along with that?
By like 1961, there were more than 800,000 people in the CDRs in Cuba, and the population was only 7 million. So that's what, like 1 in 9 people were spying on their neighbors?
I can't even wrap my head around that. Was it all just fear, or did people really believe in what they were doing?
I mean, fear was definitely a part of it, especially as things got worse, but you can't ignore the fact that a lot of people, they really believed in Castro's revolution.
So they thought they were protecting their community, even if it meant turning on their friends and neighbors.
Right. They mixed this idea of community with fear, and it made the CDRs really effective. You felt like you were betraying everyone if you said anything against the government.
So it's like they made community into a tool of control.
In a way, yeah. But this is where Castro did things differently than Hitler. Hitler wanted to crush anyone who disagreed with him. Remember that whole culture of suspicion? Castro, well, he did that too, but he also gave people a way out, a release valve.
You mean exile. He let people leave.
Exactly. If you didn't like things, he pretty much encouraged you to get out. It sounds weird, right? But it was actually really smart.
Yeah, I guess it gets rid of your enemies. But wouldn't it be better to keep them close so you can, keep an eye on them?
That's what most dictators would do, but Castro realized this was better. If you let people leave, first, you get rid of the troublemakers, the ones who might actually fight back. Second, it makes everyone else more afraid. If they step out of line, they have to leave too.
And of course, there's the propaganda angle.
Oh, definitely. Castro used it to make it seem like Cuba was the good guy and everyone was picking on them. Look at all these people, he'd say. They have to leave our amazing socialist country because those mean capitalists are making them.
It's pretty awful when you think about it, how he used people's lives like that. But I have to admit, it was a good strategy. So you have these dictators. They both use control and brutality, but in different ways for different reasons. It's really interesting.
And that's why we have to be careful not to oversimplify things. It's easy to think all dictators are the same, they must all do the same things. But it's more complicated than that. And that's where these different schools of thought come in. They give us different perspectives on these dictators.
You're talking about those totalitarian, functionalist, revisionist labels, right? To be honest, I always get a little lost with those. Maybe you could break it down for me and for our listeners and explain how they apply to Hitler and Castro.
Of course. Think of it this way. Like, imagine a huge, complex machine, okay? You could look at the plans, the overall design. That's kind of like the totalitarian view. Or you could look at how all the parts work together, the nuts and bolts. That's more like the functionalist approach.
Okay, I think I see what you're saying. So how would they view, say, the Holocaust or the UMAP camps? Would they see them differently?
Exactly. A totalitarian view of the Holocaust, they might focus on Hitler's ideology, how his beliefs basically took over the whole country and led to the genocide. A functionalist, though, they might be more interested in the everyday people involved. The people working in the offices, the train conductors, the guards at the camps. They might not have been as gung-ho about Hitler's ideas, but they were still part of what happened.
So it's not that one view is right and the other is wrong. It's more like looking at the same thing from different sides.
Exactly. And then you've got the revisionists. They come in and say, hold on, what about this detail we've all been ignoring? They might question the usual story, find new evidence, or just see things in a whole new way.
So they're like the history detectives, making sure we're not missing anything important.
That's a great way to put it. And then just to make things even more interesting, we have the post-revisionists, who build on what the revisionists did and add their own thoughts.
Wow, so much to think about. It's like we need a whole other deep dive just to cover all of that.
It really is a huge and complicated field, and it's always changing. But the important thing is that history isn't about memorizing dates and names. It's about thinking about all these different ideas, all these different viewpoints, so we can understand the past and how it affects us today.
It's easy to get caught up in all those labels, totalitarian, all that. But I think what really struck me is how complex these systems of control actually were. It wasn't just about being brutal. It was the psychology, the ideas, even messing with people's sense of community.
Absolutely. And I think that's why we really have to look deeper. We can't just say, oh, those dictators, they were just crazy. We have to understand how they came to power, what allowed it to happen, or else how can we stop it from happening again?
That's a really good point. We can't just think about the past like it's totally separate from us. So what should we be looking out for today? Like, what are the warning signs?
That's the question, isn't it? And there's no easy answer. But I think one of the most dangerous things is to think, oh, that could never happen here. Because if history teaches us anything, it's that it can happen anywhere.
We saw it with Hitler, with Castro. They didn't just take over overnight, you
Yeah.
know. It was gradual, step by step, and always with some excuse like we need to be safe
Yeah.
or we have to be united.
Exactly. So we always have to be paying attention, always be ready to question things, to stand up and say when something's wrong, even when it's scary, even when it feels easier to just stay quiet. Because when we stay silent, it just lets the bad guys win.
Like that saying, all that's necessary for evil to win is for good people to do nothing.
So true. And it's not even just about being good. It's about knowing what's going on, being involved, fighting for what's right, for democracy, for basic human rights, for all the things these dictators tried to destroy.
That's a lot to ask, but I guess it's on all of us. And I think that's really what this whole conversation has shown me. We can't just sit back and learn about history. We have to try to make things better.
I completely agree. And that starts with trying to understand the past, learning from the mistakes people made. Because like they say, when we forget the past, we're doomed to repeat it, right?
Wow, yeah. This has been, I don't know, both fascinating and kind of scary. It makes you think the fight for freedom, it never really ends, does it?
Yeah.
It's something we have to choose every day.
It really is. And sometimes it starts with just asking the tough questions, questioning things, talking about things like power and control, even when it's uncomfortable.
You've given us a lot to think about. So to everyone listening, thank you so much for joining us. I hope this made you curious, made you think, maybe even made you a little uncomfortable. Because sometimes that's how we start to make things better. Keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep those brains working. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.